Hello, everyone. Today we were asked to discuss Competency 1F, which states that candidates know, understand, and apply Washington State's approved English Language Proficiency Standards. So the reading we were assigned was the actual document that listed the ELP standards. So I would like to start by speaking a little bit about the standards as a whole, as well as the guiding principles that were applied when they were created. So according to the document, the ELP standards that are used in Washington highlight and amplify the critical language, knowledge about language, and skills using language that are in the Common Core standards that are necessary for English language learners to be successful in school. So I'm coming into this with a familiarity around these standards. I've seen them, I've implemented them in my classroom, as well as I've familiarized myself with the indicators of what we can expect from students at the different levels. But what I had not seen before and really enjoyed reading were the 8 guiding principles that were upheld in the creation of these standards. So I'm just going to take a minute and talk about each of these principles and just where I've seen their presence in our district, as well as where I've seen their absence. So the first one is the idea of potential, right? This idea that English language learners have the same potential as native English speakers to engage in cognitively complex tasks, regardless of their English language proficiency level, and they should be provided with challenging, grade-appropriate curriculum, instruction, and assessment. So when I first read that one, I said, yay, duh, it seems common sense, right? But I have seen the opposite of this principle take place in some schools, where assignments for English learners have been dumbed down. I don't like that. Maybe I should say modified in a meaningless way, right? Modified in a way that did not challenge students and might have actually damaged them more. And I don't think that it was done intentionally, but where I've seen this is in the instruction of foundational literacy, right? Foundational literacy skills are taught primarily in the primary grades. So a lot of our manipulatives and tools that we have are very primary directed. And so when we have a student enter one of our upper grades, and I'm a 5th grade teacher, so I'm speaking specifically of elementary, where do we turn to for resources and supplies for that student? We turn to the primary grades in some places, which means that we're providing a 5th grader with material that might make them feel like they're being babied and might lead to them being embarrassed. And we shouldn't do that, right? We need to find other materials. There are a ton of materials on Teachers Pay Teachers that are actual manipulatives that won't make our older students feel quite so babied as they acquire those foundational literacy skills. Not to mention technology, right? There's so many different types of technology that we can implement in our classroom to help our students manipulate and move and gain some of those foundational skills. The second guiding principle that was considered was funds of knowledge, which we've talked about before. But the thing that was pointed out in the document that I really want to point to is the need for that awareness of culture to be embedded into curriculum, into instruction, and the thing that stuck out to me was into assessment, right? How we assess our students should also consider their funds of knowledge. I know we don't have control over SBAC. I'm talking about the assessments, our classroom assessments. The next one was the diversity and ELL progress. This one was just talking about how students' English language proficiency level is not fixed. Rather, students can be more advanced in their production of oral language, maybe not as advanced in their written language proficiency. And that because of that, we can't really wait to teach them content until every single part of their language acquisition is at a 5, right? We really should utilize appropriate scaffolding so that students can acquire both language and content simultaneously. Which leads into the next one, which was scaffolding. I touched on this a little bit earlier when we talked about potential, but students should be provided scaffolding in a way that they get the appropriate level of support while still being upheld to the appropriate level of complexity to challenge that student, right? We want to challenge them, but not overwhelm them or underwhelm them, right? So this might be providing them with sentence frames or stems, or pre-teaching essential vocabulary, or even appropriately adjusting texts to challenge them in appropriate ways. So the following, the following guiding principle was students with limited or interrupted formal education must be provided with access to targeted supports that allow them to access foundational literacy skills in an accelerated time frame. So this makes me think of a student that I had this past year. He had moved to Pasco the year before, so in 4th grade, and he moved from the Marshall Islands. His home language was Marshallese, and he had no experience with formal education prior to coming to Pasco. His mom, it kind of a separate issue, but his uncle received custody of him and discovered that he had not been in school at all, ever, period. So immediately enrolled him and was very concerned that he was so far behind. So his 4th grade teacher was phenomenal, and then he came into my class and really stretched me in terms of creating and finding scaffolds and appropriate accommodations for him. But one thing that came to mind is he was able to use the dictate, the talk to text feature in his writing assignments. Tests were read to him, a tutor. He worked one-on-one with an amazing tutor who would come and help him just learn those foundational literacy skills. So that just pretty cool, something that we are doing here. And then the following provision was that for special needs students, language development goals should be a part of their IEPs. That is something that gen ed teachers should definitely check for and advocate for when we have those IEP meetings. And I'm sure our SPED teachers are already embedding those, but it's just something to keep your eye out for. Followed by the next one, access, supports, and accommodations. So we already kind of talked about this previously, but English learners should have access to accommodations for assessments so that the results are valid and reflect what they actually know. And they should have access to these supports during instruction as well as assessments. So thinking and reflecting on this, one example that springs to mind is in math, strangely. So before every test, we make sure to read through the questions together as a class, and students know to circle important information or highlight key things as we're reading. But in some cases, you know, it's important to take those small groups of our English learners and build sentence stems and frames with them for those questions where they're being asked to explain their thinking. And we should do this primarily because we want to know if they understand the mathematical concepts, and we don't want their proficiency levels in English to hinder them from expressing themselves fully. And then the last one, number 8, was multimedia technology and new literacies. So this is just those relevant, strategic, and appropriate technology should be aligned to the standards and integrated into our instruction. I know that I'm going to kind of veer off a little bit, but this is so important, especially this year as we are looking into going into a hybrid model of education where technology is going to be one of, if not the main medium for instruction. So we need to make sure that this fall we are addressing the technology literacy of our ELLs. I know in the spring, I personally had the hardest time engaging some of my families that didn't speak English in the home for a variety of reasons. But one of the issues was that they might not have had access to email, or their students didn't know how to access their personal emails. So communication was a challenge. Making those phone calls was a challenge, right? So I think as we move into fall, we really need to find ways to engage our families, but also educate them appropriately on the technology that we will be using to instruct our students. Okay, so I really appreciated this document. I appreciated going through and rereading those standards and the indicators of proficiency level. One thing that I really appreciated reading, and I've printed and put in a binder ready for when I start teaching again, is that it tied the ELP standards to the Common Core standards in that really nice and easy document for each grade. I want to make sure to add these to my lesson planning as I move forward, and make sure that I have those indicators ready and handy so that I can know what I can first and foremost expect from my students, but then also know how to push them so that they continue to grow and create appropriate scaffolds for them that challenge them appropriately. I am very sure that this video is pushing my length limit, my time limit. So I'm going to stop it right here, and I look forward to hearing from all of y'all.